I was 30 minutes away from closing a $72 million expansion when the CEO's nephew decided I no longer fit the future. My name is Mara Ellison. I am 48 years old, and for 20 years I built Northbridge Advisory's enterprise accounts, from handshake introductions into contracts that survived audits, mergers, and crises. At 4:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. From Dylan Ward. Come to my office immediately. The Atlas Freight closing call was scheduled for 5. The board had approved. Legal had cleared final compliance language that EA personally structured to protect both sides from regulatory exposure. All that remained was confirmation. I walked into Dylan's glass-walled office and knew instantly this wasn't about Atlas. HR sat to the left. Kira Vance sat to the right. Legs crossed. Laptop open. Dylan leaned back like he was announcing quarterly growth. Mara, Northbridge is entering a new phase. AI first, modernized client engagement, scalable systems. Is there an issue with Atlas, I asked? No, he said smoothly. But we're restructuring leadership to align with innovation. He paused, studying me. Your strength has always been relationship management, he added. But we can't build the future around personality. We need scalable intelligence. The sentence was polite. It was also dismissive. I had spent 2 decades absorbing risk so clients didn't have to. He slid a folder across the desk. Severance agreement. Non-disclosure. Non-solicit. I looked at him carefully. You're terminating me the day of a $72 million close. It's a strategic decision, he replied. Kira will oversee Atlas moving forward. Kira gave a small, tight smile. She understands modern client expectations. Dylan continued. Let's see how strong those relationships really are. My phone vibrated again. Atlas CFO. Dylan glanced at the screen. Go ahead, he said. I answered. Mara, we're ready to finalize once you confirm the escalation protocol language. I held Dylan's eyes. I'm no longer leading the account, I said evenly. Northbridge will follow up. Silence, and then pause slowly. We'll need to review that. The call ended. Dylan folded his hands, see smooth transition. But we both knew it wasn't. Atlas had worked with me for 9 years. I'd walked them through 2 acquisitions and a federal compliance audit. Their board didn't trust a logo. They trusted the person who protected them when exposure surfaced. HR cleared her throat. We'll need your badge. As I stood, Dylan added, experience is valuable. Mara, but it's not innovation. Maybe, but innovation doesn't replace accountability. And when you remove the person clients rely on 5 minutes before a closing, you don't create momentum. You create doubt. And doubt spreads faster than strategy ever could. 380 words, I packed 20 years into bankers' boxes while HR watched like I might slip a client out through the ceiling tiles. Awards. Framed photos from executive retreats. A coffee mug Atlas had sent after we cleared their audit in under 48 hours. Each item reduced to something that could be taped shut and carried to a parking garage. Colleagues avoided eye contact. Word traveled fast inside Northbridge. By the time I reached the elevator, I wasn't a senior director anymore. I was a cautionary tale. Dylan believed the company owned everything that mattered. The CRM system, the contracts, the brand, the legal leverage buried in non-solicit language. But what they didn't own was trust. That night, I sat at my dining table with a legal pad and started taking inventory of what I actually had. First, my operational playbook. Frameworks I built over 2 decades for enterprise implementation, risk mitigation, escalation mapping, and compliance sequencing. None of it copied, none of it taken. Every system refined through lived crisis and post-mortem lessons learned the hard way. Second, my direct relationships. 35. CIOs and COOs who had my personal cell number because I answered at midnight when systems failed. Because I stayed on bridge calls until sunrise. Because I absorbed pressure so they didn't have to explain failure to their boards. Third, my reputation. Executive roundtables, industry advisory panels, closed-door strategy sessions where my name carried weight beyond a logo. I did not text a single client. I updated my LinkedIn instead. Independent Enterprise Operations Consultant. No mention of Northbridge, no bitterness, just accuracy. Then I waited. 3 days later, Atlas emailed Northbridge requesting clarification on the escalation protocol language I'd personally structured. Kira responded with a polished, branded template about dynamic alignment in a modernized engagement model. Atlas replied within the hour, we require operational detail, not positioning language. The closing was postponed. Doubt had entered the room. And doubt doesn't leave easily. If competence can't be replaced by confidence slides, how long before clients start noticing the difference? The first visible fracture appeared in week 1. A mid-sized logistics client received a federal compliance notice tied to a reporting update I had flagged 6 months earlier during quarterly review. It wasn't catastrophic, but it required precision. The kind of precision that doesn't tolerate shortcuts. Kira drafted the response using an AI-generated memo format Dylan had been promoting as part of the efficiency overhaul. It looked polished. It missed a critical disclosure timeline. What I later learned was this: the original draft had included a detailed escalation schedule. Dylan personally edited the document before it went out, removing what he called legacy language to simplify the tone. "We can automate regulatory nuance," he reportedly told the compliance team. "We don't need to bury clients in technical overkill." The deleted section contained the exact timing requirement the notice referenced. The client called Northbridge in a panic before noon. Internally, Dylan dismissed it as resistance to modernization. He framed the issue as discomfort with new systems rather than procedural failure. But penalties don't care about narratives. By the end of the week, late fees began stacking. Atlas quietly requested a secondary review from outside counsel. They didn't announce it. They didn't accuse anyone. They simply stopped relying exclusively on Northbridge. Inside the firm, whispers started moving faster than official emails. Renee Park, our CFO, began reviewing retention metrics. Revenue projections dipped slightly, then sharply. A red flag appeared on the client dashboard, first one in 3 years. 3 days later, another enterprise account triggered a contractual penalty tied to delayed implementation documentation. Patterns were forming. I remained silent. My phone stayed face down on my desk, notifications lighting up the room without being answered, until 7:12 a.m. the following Tuesday. It was a message from a CIO I had worked with for 8 years. Off the record, "What's happening over there?" I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. "I can't discuss internal matters, but if you need independent guidance, I can refer someone appropriate." No commentary, no emotion. I stayed within the line. He replied almost immediately. "Understood." There are moments when markets shift without announcement. When the first client reaches out quietly, is it curiosity? Or the beginning of migration? Chapter 4, the calls begin 360 words. The calls multiplied. Not dramatic, not emotional, professional. We're experiencing inconsistencies. Deadlines aren't being met. Who's overseeing escalation now? Each conversation followed the same structure, measured tone. Controlled concern, underlying calculation. I gave the same answer every time. "I'm not affiliated with Northbridge. If you require advisory support, I can connect you with qualified counsel." No commentary, no invitation, no solicitation. By week 2, 4 enterprise clients had formally requested independent consultations, all initiated by them. All documented. Inside Northbridge, Dylan responded the only way he knew how. He sent a firm-wide email reminding staff of legal consequences tied to unauthorized client communication. The language was aggressive, heavy with phrases like breach, violation, exposure. It didn't read like confidence. It read like fear. Renee texted me privately that evening. "This is unraveling faster than expected." I didn't reply immediately. At Northbridge, Dylan doubled down on automation. A new client tracking dashboard was implemented to demonstrate transparency and control. It tracked document revisions in real time, and ironically, that transparency cut both ways. Within days, several compliance documents showed edit histories where technical clauses had been removed or simplified. Most of those edits were logged under Kira's credentials. Clauses tied to regulatory sequencing, escalation triggers, penalty mitigation language. They weren't malicious deletions, they were uninformed ones. And the logs could not be erased. Meanwhile, Atlas formally paused the $72 million expansion indefinitely, citing the need for operational clarity. Board members began asking uncomfortable questions. Why was a senior executive removed days before closing? What contingency planning had been in place? Who approved the transition timeline? Dylan's answer remained consistent. This is strategic repositioning, but strategy doesn't argue with data. And data, once recorded, doesn't adjust itself for narrative. When systems designed to prove innovation begin documenting incompetence, who really holds the leverage? 350 words, I waited the full 30 days. No shortcuts, No quiet workarounds. No informal advisory calls that could be twisted into violation. If Dylan wanted to paint me as reckless, I wasn't going to hand him the brush. On day 6, I met Owen Briggs for coffee. Owen ran a boutique advisory firm known for something Northbridge used to value precision. No flash, no slogans, just clean execution and careful documentation. He didn't waste time. Senior advisor, he said, no direct competition during your restriction period. You operate independently. We structure everything through formal engagement letters. Full compliance, but gooey. It wasn't dramatic, it was thoughtful. Meanwhile, at Northbridge lost 2 more enterprise clients. One triggered a contractual penalty clause after a missed implementation milestone. The other initiated formal transition discussions. Citing declining operational confidence, Renee presented updated retention metrics to the board. The trend line no longer dipped. It dropped. Dylan reframed it as temporary turbulence associated with modernization. In private, board members began asking about exposure. What was the financial impact of multiple departures? Were any compliance issues tied to leadership transition? Had legal risk increased? Owen's firm began receiving inbound inquiries not from me, not at my suggestion, but directly from clients requesting proposals. Each inquiry was documented. Each request was initiated by them. I did not sign a single agreement until the 31st day. When I did, it was deliberate. Engagement letter, scope defined, conflict check cleared. All communication archived, clean, documented, defensible. The first contract I signed was with a client who had worked with me for 11 years. They didn't say they were leaving Northbridge because of me. They said they were leaving because they no longer felt safe. There's a difference. If clients move because they feel unsafe, can legal threats stop? Gravity, 380 words. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. on a Thursday. Revenue was down significantly quarter over quarter. Not catastrophic yet, but sharp enough to alarm investors. 5 enterprise accounts were officially under review. Atlas Freight had formally withdrawn its $72 million expansion, citing operational instability. Renee Park stood at the front of the conference room with a slide deck that didn't rely on adjectives. Just numbers. Increased penalties, compliance exposure, declining retention, documentation inconsistencies. Each bullet point corresponded to a measurable loss. Each loss traced back to implementation gaps that had emerged within weeks of my departure. Dylan attempted to reframe the narrative. Short-term friction is normal during transformation, he said. We're modernizing outdated processes. One board member leaned forward. Let's be direct, she said. Was Mara Ellison terminated for performance reasons? The room went quiet. Renee didn't speak. Legal didn't interrupt. Dylan hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice. It was a strategic decision, he said finally. We needed leadership aligned with modernization. The phrasing landed heavily. Strategic, not performance-related, not disciplinary, not misconduct. Across town, that same afternoon, 2 major enterprise clients signed advisory agreements with Owen's firm. Both contracts had been initiated by the clients. Both were structured within clear legal boundaries. Northbridge's legal team began preparing potential action review of non-solicit clauses, evaluation of competitive exposure. But their position had weakened. The more Dylan spoke publicly about modernization, the clearer it became that my termination was not cause-based. Cause-based terminations support enforcement. Strategic terminations invite scrutiny. Inside the boardroom, questions shifted from how do we accelerate innovation to what is our liability exposure? Because once strategy becomes the official explanation, accountability follows. And accountability is rarely comfortable for the person who claims it. When strategy becomes the official explanation, who becomes legally exposed? Northbridge hosted the live-stream town hall on a Tuesday afternoon. The invite described it as a transparency initiative for investors and key stakeholders. Dylan stood beneath a minimalist backdrop displaying the company's new AI-forward branding. His tone was controlled, confident, rehearsed. At first, the questions were predictable. How will automation improve margins? What is the projected retention rate for Q3? How is the modernization initiative progressing? Then one message appeared in the live chat feed. Is it true Mara Ellison was terminated to make room for leadership without operational experience? The moderator hesitated, visibly uncertain whether to read it aloud. Dylan saw it anyway. There was a pause, brief, but long enough to be noticed. Yes, he said finally. It was a strategic realignment decision, aligned with our modernization roadmap. He smiled as he said it, as if clarity was strength. A reporter in the live Q&A pushed further. So to confirm, she said, this was not performance-related. Dylan shifted slightly. We don't build companies around individuals, he replied. We build scalable platforms. The sentence landed harder than he intended. In the second row, CEO, Grant Ward lowered his eyes. For the first time, Dylan's composure flickered. This isn't about one person, he added quickly. It's about future-proofing, but the moment had already clipped itself into permanence. Within hours, the segment was circulating across professional networks. Industry blogs picked up the exchange. LinkedIn commentary followed. Former clients began connecting timelines: my termination, stalled projects, compliance gaps. The narrative shifted from speculation to confirmation. By the end of the week, 12 enterprise clients had issued formal termination notices. 5 requested immediate transition plans, citing operational instability. Internal morale collapsed. Senior managers began quietly exploring exit options. Recruiters started calling. Renee walked into Dylan's office the following morning with a printed transcript of the live stream. You just confirmed it wasn't performance-related, she said calmly. That weakens our enforcement position on the non-solicit. Dylan's jaw tightened. You're overreacting, he said. We needed modernization. That statement changes our legal posture, she replied. Strategic termination opens the door to bad faith arguments. He accused her of disloyalty, of undermining leadership, of resisting change, but damage doesn't reverse because it's denied. The narrative was no longer contained inside conference rooms or internal emails. It was public. And once a company's credibility is questioned in public, every client begins performing their own risk assessment. Transparency doesn't automatically destroy authority, but transparency without competence does. When the truth goes live, can authority survive transparency? The migration accelerated quietly at first. Then, all at once, 32 clients either terminated their contracts or formally requested proposals from Owen's firm within a 3-week span. Each transition followed proper procedure. Each notice cited operational concerns, compliance instability, or leadership uncertainty. No one mentioned me directly. They didn't need to. Atlas Freight officially transitioned its enterprise portfolio on a Monday morning. The same board that once waited for my confirmation now signed with structured clarity elsewhere. By midweek, Grant Ward called me personally. He didn't open with pleasantries. Name your terms, he said. I remained silent long enough for him to understand that I wasn't negotiating from anger. I don't want a title, I said evenly. I want an organization that respects expertise. There was a pause on the line. Then, quietly, I made a mistake. The words weren't defensive. They weren't strategic. They were tired. I should never have let him do that, he added. I thought energy could substitute for judgment. For a moment, I almost felt the weight of the 40 years he had spent building that firm. You built those relationships here, he said, softer now. No, I replied. I built them with people. There was a difference. And he offered partnership, division control, public reinstatement. I declined. Inside Northbridge, lenders began evaluating risk exposure. Loan covenants tied to revenue stability triggered internal review. Investor confidence dropped sharply after quarterly forecasts were revised. Dylan's authority was quietly restricted. Decision-making moved through committees. Legal reviewed communications before they were released. The same autonomy he once wielded confidently was diluted by oversight. Renee resigned 2 days later. Her exit memo was brief and professional. Within a week, 2 senior managers followed her, both joining Owen's firm under clearly structured roles. There was no celebration, no press release framing it as victory, just movement. Measured, documented, final. Northbridge attempted retention incentives, temporary rate reductions, rebranding campaigns. But trust doesn't respond to incentives. It responds to stability. By the time the board commissioned an external audit of operational risk, the shift had already solidified. Clients weren't reacting emotionally. They were managing exposure. And once exposure becomes the dominant concern, loyalty becomes secondary. Northbridge had relied on legal leverage. Clients had relied on operational certainty. One holds people in place, the other keeps them there. The shift was no longer reversible. When loyalty is replaced by leverage, can leadership be restored? Chapter 9, The Collapse Without a Bang, 300 words. Northbridge did not implode overnight. It contracted. 70% revenue loss in a single quarter forced immediate restructuring. Departments were consolidated. Hiring froze. Retention incentives became emergency measures rather than growth tools. Acquisition talks began quietly, framed internally as strategic alignment opportunities. Externally, analysts described them differently. Distressed repositioning, valuation plummeted as enterprise accounts finalized departures, and projected revenue streams vanished. What had once been a confident modernization campaign turned into defensive negotiation. The company was eventually sold at a fraction of prior projections. No dramatic headlines, no courtroom spectacle, just paperwork. The Northbridge logo came down from the building one Saturday morning before most employees arrived. By Monday, temporary signage covered the entrance. Within months, the building was fully rebranded. Dylan remained in a ceremonial advisory role during the transition. His title suggested continuity. His authority did not. Operational control shifted to the acquiring firm's leadership team. Committees replaced autonomy. Oversight replaced experimentation. Internally, the narrative became one of market correction. But markets don't correct culture. They correct exposure. There was no dramatic explosion, no televised apology, no public reckoning, just consequence unfolding at corporate speed. For those watching from the outside, it seemed like a natural business cycle. For those who understood the timeline, it was simpler. Trust had been removed before it was replaced, and when trust leaves first, revenue follows. When an institution falls quietly, who actually writes its final chapter 6 months later? I stood in the corner office at Owen's firm with a view I hadn't earned through politics, but through transition, managing partner. The title mattered less than the structure behind it. Renee served as CFO, restoring financial discipline with the same calm precision she had shown during the collapse. 2 former senior managers from Northbridge led enterprise implementation under clearly defined protocols. 32 former Northbridge clients now operated within stable, structured systems. Escalation pathways were documented. Compliance reviews were double verified. Board communications were aligned with operational reality. No one talked about modernization slogans. They talked about risk mitigation and execution timelines. Industry reports later described Northbridge's decline as a case study in leadership miscalculation during modernization. No names were printed beside the phrase, but the timeline spoke clearly enough. I looked out over the skyline one evening after a client review meeting. There was no bitterness, only clarity. Clients do not stay for branding. They stay for protection. They stay for the person who answers when exposure appears at 2:00 a.m. I was never the disruptor. I was the safeguard. And when I was removed, the structure failed because the structure had depended on accountability, not optics. Northbridge didn't fall because of ambition. It fell because leadership confused appearance with competence. The difference is invisible at first, then it becomes measurable. If you were replaced for optics over expertise, would you fight emotionally or let competence speak for itself? Hand over full access. Now. That's how it started. Not a hello. Not a let's talk. Just that loud, sharp, like I'd stolen something. I said, no. 5 minutes later, he escalated it to the board, but that wasn't actually the beginning. The beginning was at 1:32 in the morning, when my phone lit up and buzzed against my nightstand. That ugly metallic vibration, I swear I knew it wasn't spam before I even picked it up. Unauthorized cross-account snapshot export blocked. Credential Daniel Harlow. Attempted to exfiltrate the production environment to an unlisted AWS account. Compliance lock triggered source code residency must remain within Howell-owned nodes. All of it blocked automatically. Compliance lock did its job. Isolated the attempt. Logged everything. Time-stamped down to the second. I sat up in bed. The room smelled faintly like the burnt coffee I'd forgotten to wash out of the mug earlier. That's what I remember. Burnt coffee and my phone lighting up my hands. I exported the logs. Encrypted them. Saved copies to 2 different drives. Yeah, maybe that sounds paranoid. But I built this system 8 years ago. I've been burned before. You learn. My name is Aurora Howell. I run Howell Systems LLC. I'm not their employee. Never was. I architected the backbone of their entire operation when they were still working out of a drafty warehouse off East Austin. I kept ownership. They licensed it, and at 1:32 in the morning, their new CEO tried to copy it. The next morning, I was invited upstairs. Glass walls, too much air conditioning. He didn't sit me down, didn't ease in, hand over full administrative access. Now, like it was his birthright. I looked past him at the founder's photo on the wall. 8 years ago, we were duct taping servers together and praying the thing wouldn't crash. I built guardrails for a reason. No, I said. He blinked, like he genuinely hadn't considered that answer. You work for this company? No. I said again. You license from mine. He stood up, raised his voice, talked about risk, control, authority. Honestly, I almost caved for a second, just to make the noise stop. That's the stupid part. You ever feel that urge to smooth things over even when you're right instead? I told him the system logs replication attempts separately from normal access. I told him I had the timestamp, 1:32 in the morning. His face changed. And that's when I realized this wasn't about access. This was about control. And I had just said no to the wrong man. He kept staring at me like I was being dramatic. You're our infrastructure lead. Harlow pressed. This is internal. I'm not internal. I told him I'm licensed. His jaw tightened. Same difference. It's not. He didn't like that tone. I could see it. He leaned back, folded his arms like he was humoring a child. Let me simplify this. He went on, you built it for us? It runs our business. That makes it ours. I shook my head. It runs on cloud accounts owned by Howell Systems, LLC. That's my company. The agreement grants operational access, not ownership. Silence. Then a small scoff. You're splitting hairs. No, I'm protecting insurance. That caught him. The cyber liability policy, I continued. It requires master administrative control to stay with a registered, insured operator. That's me. Transfer it to someone outside the registry. Coverage can be voided. Audit continuity compromised? He blinked. We have legal for that. You have legal for contract review. I answered, you don't have insurance override. He stood up again, pacing now, impatient. So you're telling me I, as CEO, don't control the core system of this company, I'm telling you. I said evenly, that your title doesn't amend Appendix C. He didn't respond right away. That was new. He wasn't used to pushback without panic. 8 years ago, when the company was in a warehouse that smelled like dust and overheated wiring. The founder and I wrote that contract carefully. IP retained by Howell Systems. Licensed access only. Escalation rules. Compliance triggers. I didn't keep control because I wanted power. I kept it because I've watched companies tear themselves apart when governance gets sloppy. Harlow finally spoke again. Quieter this time. You're not an employee. No, I told him. I'm the firewall you're trying to bypass. And the way he looked at me then, I realized he didn't think he was bypassing anything. He thought he was fixing a weakness. By the afternoon, it wasn't just me and him in that glass office. Cynthia from HR joined us. But she looked at the folder in her hand with visible hesitation. She didn't slide it across the table right away. Daniel, she said quietly, this is a material vendor disruption. Under the company bylaws, terminating Aurora without a supermajority board vote creates a breach of your fiduciary duty. You're not just firing a contractor, you're creating a void in the corporate governance chain right before the secondary offering. I read it slowly. He framed it cleanly. Operational restructuring, internal risk consolidation, no accusations. Just power. You're bypassing risk committee, I pointed out quietly. I'm acting within my authority. And insurance compliance will address it after transition. After... That word hung there. Raymond cleared his throat. Daniel, if this triggers something... It won't. Harlow cut in. We're reclaiming control. I looked down at Section 5, Subsection 4. I knew that clause better than I knew my own phone number. You're sure? I asked him. He met my eyes. Completely. I signed the acknowledgement line. Acknowledged? I said. Cynthia looked relieved. Harlow looked victorious. Raymond looked uneasy. They thought termination gave them leverage. I knew it activated compliance lock. And compliance doesn't care about executive confidence. By late afternoon, the board dialed in. Their voices layered over the speakerphone tight, controlled, and distinctly unfriendly. To them. I wasn't the architect who built their foundation. I was a technical debt they were trying to settle. One director cut straight to the jugular. We have an escrow agreement for the source code. Correct, yes, I replied. My voice steady. But escrow is a fail-safe, not a skeleton key. It activates only on contractor breach, insolvency, or after a mandatory 30-day arbitration period. None of those conditions have been met, so we trigger a breach now. Another voice jumped in. Cold and opportunistic. You can't, I countered. There is no failure to perform. My system is running at 99.9% uptime. Harlow leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the mahogany table. Termination for convenience changes the landscape. Aurora, it nullifies your standing. No, I said, and for the first time, I let a small, sharp smile touch my lips. Termination without cause is exactly what triggers Section 5. Subsection 4, Raymond, who had been silent in the corner, finally muttered the words that had been haunting him all day. Compliance lock. There it was. The ghost in the machine. What exactly does that mean in plain English, a board member demanded, their voice rising in pitch. The system isn't shutting down, I explained, leaning into the speaker. It's enforcing read-only integrity. Administrative right access is automatically suspended because the delegated responsible official DRO certificate was revoked by the termination notice you just issued. That certificate is the only thing authorizing changes to the production environment under our cyber insurance policy. The business can still breathe, the customers can still log in, but you can't rewrite the system's DNA without a registered, insured operator, which, as of your notice, you no longer have. You're holding our data hostage. The voice on the phone accused, I'm not. I said, the architecture is simply enforcing the contract you've been paying for. It doesn't recognize Harlow's title, it only recognizes valid governance tokens. Even if you got the code from escrow today, I added, it's a snapshot of the past. It's not the live, authenticated environment required for the offering. You'd spend months rebuilding the infrastructure while your valuation bleeds out in weeks. Harlow exhaled sharply. A sound of pure frustration. You designed it this way from the start. A kill switch hidden in the fine print. I designed it to protect governance, I corrected. To ensure that no single ego could override 8 years of audit trail and insurance compliance. The room went quiet. The kind of silence that happens when a predator realizes the cage they're in is locked from the outside. A board member spoke again, much slower now. If we rescind the termination, if we return to the status quo, the compliance lock lifts within milliseconds. I replied, because the license remains valid, and the DRO certificate reauthorizes, the system doesn't hold grudges, it only checks for authorization. Harlow's voice hardened, vibrating with suppressed anger. You're leveraging technical architecture against executive authority? That's a dangerous game. Howell, I'm honoring exactly what your founders signed in that warehouse 8 years ago. I said, I'm not the one who broke the seal. Raymond rubbed his forehead, staring at the clock. When does the token expire? When does the lock actually activate 4 o'clock? I answered. I looked at my watch. 20 minutes left. They thought escrow was a safety net that would let them steal the house. They forgot I was the one who poured the concrete. At 3:59, the room felt tight. Not dramatic, just that heavy quiet before something shifts. Harlow stood by the table, arms folded. Raymond kept glancing at his watch like maybe time could be negotiated. 4 o'clock. No alarms, no flashing screens. Just a soft update across the dashboards. License validation pending contact provider. Raymond's phone buzzed almost immediately. Then again. Sales just lost transaction logging. He muttered. It's not crashing. It's just frozen. I nodded. Write access is disabled. Reporting layer paused. Harlow turned toward me. Turn it back on. I can't. I answered, not without reinstatement. Another call came in for Raymond. He stepped aside, voice low but tense. Daniel, the $25,000 an hour is the least of our problems. He hissed, the S1 filing is the real target. If this compliance lock lasts, we have to disclose a material weakness in internal controls. That disclosure will tank our valuation by 30% before we even start the roadshow. You're losing millions in market cap, not just thousands in sales. Harlow's jaw tightened. This is extortion. It's compliance. I replied. He grabbed his phone and called me directly, even though I was standing right there. Maybe he wanted the moment documented. You're putting the company at risk. He said into the receiver. You already did. I replied. You triggered termination. He lowered the phone and spoke directly. Reverse it. I don't have that authority. You designed this. I designed it to follow contract. Raymond came back. Insurance broker just emailed. They're asking why administrative governance changed. Harlow looked at me like this was some elaborate performance. You could stop this right now. He said, reinstate the contract in writing. I told him. That's all. For a second, I almost folded. I swear, watching numbers stall and real-time messes with your head, this isn't theoretical. People's commissions depend on this. Operations depend on it. And if the board backs him, I lose my biggest client. Austin's tech world is small. Word spreads. Aurora Howell, the contractor who froze a company mid-offering. That label sticks. Harlow stepped closer. You're gambling your reputation. I'm protecting it. I replied. Silence settled in again, except for Raymond's phone vibrating nonstop. No crashes, no chaos, just a system waiting for governance to catch up with authority. Raymond's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. He stepped out into the hallway, but his voice carried back through the glass. Yes, we're aware of the governance change. Pause. No. There was no breach. Longer pause. I understand. He walked back in looking 10 years older. The carrier wants an explanation, he told Harlow. They're asking why administrative authority shifted without compliance verification? Harlow frowned. It didn't shift. It did. I said, termination altered governance structure. Raymond glanced at me. Not defensive now, just worried. They're flagging audit continuity? Harlow waved a hand. We'll clarify. It's not just clarification, Raymond replied. Our secondary offering documents include governance risk disclosures. If the insurer questions continuity, the offering can be delayed. Harlow turned to me again. You engineered this. I engineered a system that follows contract. I answered. Raymond continued, almost to himself. If coverage is considered compromised, valuation shifts. Investors don't like uncertainty. This is about control, Harlow insisted. No, I cut in. This is about exposure. He stepped closer. You're hiding behind paperwork. You bypassed risk committee. I reminded him. That's documented. Raymond checked his phone again. Legal's reviewing Appendix C and Section 5. Subsection 4. They'll confirm I acted within authority. Harlow replied. They'll confirm compliance lock is functioning exactly as designed. I said. Silence hung there. This wasn't a contractor dispute anymore. It wasn't personal leverage. It was institutional liability, measured in millions and investor trust. Raymond finally looked at Harlow. Not at me. If the board sides with you, he said quietly, we may have to disclose governance instability. Harlow didn't answer right away. For the first time all day. The risk wasn't abstract. It had numbers attached to it. By early evening, the board looped in the founder. He'd been out for years, living in Santa Fe, painting badly and pretending he wasn't watching the company anymore. But when governance shakes, they still call him. I wasn't on that first call. I heard about it later from Raymond. He didn't take sides. Raymond told me quietly. He just listened. What did he say I asked? Not much. That tracked. An hour later, the email came through. Short, direct, review the indemnity clause attached to Howell Systems. That agreement protects our audit continuity. No defense of me, no attack on Harlow, no drama, just structure. Harlow read it on the screen in front of everyone. He's overstepping. Harlow muttered, he isn't. Raymond replied, he's pointing us back to the contract. Board legal dialed in next. A woman named Melissa who never wasted words. Emergency authority requires risk committee validation when insurance exposure exceeds threshold. She stated, that step was bypassed. Harlow stiffened. I acted within executive discretion. You acted without committee ratification. Melissa corrected. That creates procedural exposure. I stayed quiet. This wasn't about me anymore. The compliance lock, Melissa continued, is functioning within contractual parameters. No breach has occurred. So there it was. The failure wasn't technical, it was procedural. And procedure doesn't bend just because someone has a bigger title on their door. The emergency session lasted almost 2 hours. I wasn't inside the boardroom. I waited in the hallway with Raymond. The air smelled faintly like burnt carpet from the office coffee machine. My phone stayed in my hand the whole time. The door finally opened. Melissa stepped out first. Calm. Neutral. It's done, she told us. Harlow walked behind her. Face tight. Not angry. Controlled. Raymond looked at me. They voted. Outcome, I asked. Melissa didn't dramatize it. Termination notice rescinded. Vendor agreement reinstated effective immediately. Executive emergency authority restricted pending governance review. Harlow exhaled slowly. This is temporary. It's procedural, Melissa corrected. He looked at me then, not furious anymore, just recalculating. So what now, he asked. I didn't answer right away. I just walked back into the conference room, opened my laptop, and logged into the administrative console. Compliance lock will lift upon validation of reinstatement, I said evenly. Written confirmation has been received. Raymond nodded. Insurance broker already acknowledged reversal. I entered the command to renew authentication certificates. Restoring service under original compliance terms, I said, the dashboard refreshed on the wall display. Transaction queues resumed, reporting modules unlocked, integration pipelines reconnected one by one. No applause, no relief speeches, just the soft hum of systems stabilizing. Harlow stayed standing. You leveraged timing, he muttered. I honored structure, I replied. He didn't apologize. Didn't need to. The room had already shifted. Raymond sat down heavily. Let's not repeat this, Melissa added. Governance amendment will be drafted. Harlow gave a short nod. He wasn't defeated, but he wasn't in control the way he thought he was anymore. The amendment meeting was quieter. No raised voices, just documents and tension that hadn't fully cooled. Melissa projected the revised language onto the screen. Escalation of administrative control must route through risk committee. She began. No unilateral executive override. Harlow leaned back in his chair. Noted. Administrative transfer requires insurance validation prior to execution. She continued. Registered operator confirmation mandatory. Raymond glanced at me. That protects coverage. It protects everyone, I replied. Melissa moved to the next clause. Stability retainer fee introduced. Annual governance audit formalized. Harlow looked at the number attached to the retainer. Your increasing cost. It reflects risk management oversight, I answered, and dedicated compliance availability. He gave a small half smile. You negotiated fast. I prepared 8 years ago. The room went still for a moment. Raymond spoke next. This keeps infrastructure stable and insurable. Harlow tapped the table lightly. And it limits executive discretion. It separates infrastructure authority from impulse, Melissa corrected. He didn't argue. He signed. So did Raymond. When the document slid toward me, I paused for a second. I could have pushed for more. A title. A public acknowledgement. I didn't. I signed and closed the folder. Harlow stood up. This doesn't make you internal? I don't want to be, I replied. He gave a slow nod. I didn't win a promotion. I secured structure, and structure in this building meant survival. The next morning felt weirdly normal. No alerts, no emergency calls, just routine system checks. Raymond stopped by my office around 9. Transaction flow stabilized overnight. He told me. Backlog cleared. Insurance, I asked. Confirmed. No lapse. He lingered for a second. You could have crushed us yesterday. I didn't want to, I replied. He nodded slowly. I know. Later that afternoon, Harlow showed up. No assistant. No performance. I miscalculated, he admitted. Not about you, about process. That's usually how it happens. I said. He crossed his arms. Not defensive this time. I thought consolidating control would signal strength to investors. Strength isn't consolidation, I answered. It's structure. He exhaled. We're not done scaling. I know. He studied me. You're staying? I am. He gave a short nod and left. That was it. No handshake. No grand reconciliation. I went back to my console and reviewed the overnight logs. 8 years ago, I built this system in a warehouse that smelled like overheated plastic and cheap pizza. We were duct taping growth together and praying nothing collapsed. I kept ownership because I didn't trust momentum without guardrails. Yesterday proved why. Here's the thing I learned, and maybe you've lived this too. Power gets loud when it feels threatened. Real authority doesn't shout. It documents. It protects. It waits. If you're building anything, a company, a career, even your own boundaries, write the rules before someone else rewrites them for you. In this industry, people think power is the corner office. They're wrong. Power is the audit trail. I didn't keep the keys to be a hero. I kept them because a system is only as strong as the person willing to own its failures. Titles create noise, but structure creates survival. The system is running now. Stable. Clean. Harlow still has the corner office. I still hold the keys under contract. Titles create noise. Contracts create control. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is no, not to win. Not to dominate, but to keep everything from falling apart. Where's your name, please? Show me, she said. Her tone polished enough to pass for courtesy. I didn't answer immediately. My name wasn't missing by accident. My name had been removed. My name is Dr. Ilara Mysore. I am 42 years old, and 5 years ago I helped design the governance architecture that still holds this institute together. I know how its registry works. I know what triggers disclosure. And I knew, walking into that marble lobby, that I wouldn't be on the list. The receptionist's fingers hovered above her tablet. I'm sorry, Dr. Mysore, you're not registered for the summit. I'm aware, I said calmly. A ripple moved across the lobby as the glass doors reflected the early morning light. At exactly 9:11 a.m., Eastern Standard Time, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. Subject line emergency governance update, time-stamped, filed, right on schedule, behind the reception desk. Security shifted their weight, not aggressive, just prepared. Then she appeared. Evelyn dress, CEO, tailored suit, controlled smile, the kind that assumes the outcome before the conversation begins. This is a closed leadership session. She said, only verified stakeholders are permitted. Verified. I studied her expression. Steady and precise. She believed what the registry defined authority. She believed visibility meant control. I believed in clauses. I won't take much of your time, I replied. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Without your name on the list, but there's nothing to discuss. Maybe everything was about to be discussed. In my coat pocket, the leather folder felt heavier than it should have, not because of paper, but because of timing. And as usual, this story is a work of fiction, created by our editorial team for storytelling purposes. All characters, events, and organizations are fictional. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. Thank you, and let's continue. The elevator doors behind her chimed softly. If someone erased your name from the system you built, would you argue or would you wait for the structure to speak 18 months ago? I stopped arguing. That was the day I started reading. Not headlines, not opinion pieces, not internal memos written for optics. I read the bylaws. Every appendix, every amendment, every forgotten footnote that most executives skim once and never revisit. That's where I found it. Clause 9. 4. Proxy consolidation disclosure. Buried beneath routine governance language was a mechanism no one had triggered in over a decade. Dormant voting proxies, shares held by estates. Inactive donors or legacy board members could be consolidated under a single trust structure. And if that consolidation ever crossed majority threshold, the controlling authority would be recognized automatically if and only if the governance registry was modified. Most people read that clause as administrative housekeeping, and I read it as architecture. At the time of my exile, I owned nothing that mattered. No title, no seat, no vote. But I understood something Evelyn Dress did not. Control doesn't always sit at the table. Sometimes it sleeps in ledgers. So I began quietly. A retired neuroscientist who'd sold her board seat in frustration. A donor estate whose voting proxy had gone untouched since probate. A university endowment uninterested in monitoring small allocations. Each transaction was legal. filed, clean, documented. No press, no statements, no rumors, just signatures. Some shares I purchased outright. Others were transferred under revocable trusts structured through neutral holding entities. All disclosed properly through regulatory filings. Nothing hidden, nothing theatrical. By month 12, I'd crossed 40%. By month 15, 62. By month 18, 75% of the Institute's dormant and active voting power rested inside a consolidated proxy trust mine. And because the registry had not changed, no automatic disclosure was required. Until someone tried to change it. That was the brilliance of Clause 9.4. It didn't reward ambition. It punished negligence. The board thought removing my name removed my influence, and they forgot something fundamental. Authority recorded quietly is still authority. And when someone forces a structural change without reading the fine print, the structure responds. What's more dangerous, an enemy who shouts, or one who files paperwork? Evelyn Dress was not incompetent. That was what made her dangerous. She arrived with a resume built for acceleration, 2 restructurings, 1 merger, and a defense sector expansion that tripled licensing revenue in under a year. The board didn't hire her to preserve legacy ethics charters. They hired her to scale. 90 days, that was her mandate. Increase revenue, streamline governance, remove friction. In her first internal address, she used words like velocity, efficiency, and alignment. She spoke about inactive influence, slowing institutional progress, about outdated proxy structures and sentimental governance. I listened to the recording twice. She wasn't wrong about one thing: dormant systems create blind spots. She just misidentified where the blind spot was. Within her first month, she ordered a registry review. Legal was instructed to reconcile voting authority against active participants. The phrase sounded harmless. It wasn't. An internal memo circulated: Emergency Leadership Summit Governance Realignment Agenda. Buried in the agenda draft was a proposal to modify voting eligibility requirements. Minor adjustments, technical language, reclassification of certain proxy holders as inactive stakeholders. Most executives would see housekeeping. I saw movement toward Clause 9.4. Her fatal flaw wasn't arrogance in the theatrical sense. It was compression. She believed speed was proof of control. She trusted dashboards more than documents. And she assumed that if my name wasn't visible in the registry, I no longer existed in the structure. At 8:42 a.m., the morning of the summit, legal began reviewing registry modification paperwork. At 9:11 a.m., the emergency governance update email went out. I didn't smile when I read it. I simply checked the timestamp. What happens when a leader moves quickly through a system she hasn't fully mapped? By the time I reached the elevator, the real work had already begun. I didn't need to rush. Structure moves on timestamps, not emotion. At 8:42 a.m., internal counsel had circulated the draft amendment governance registry modernization. Clean language, harmless tone, a technical adjustment to voting eligibility standards. At 9:11 a.m., the email went out. Subject: Emergency Governance Update timestamp, 9:11 a.m. EST. I read it once. Then again. They were modifying the registry, not auditing it, not reviewing it, modifying it. Upstairs. Evelyn believed she was tightening control, reclassifying inactive proxy holders, consolidating influence under visible participants. She likely hadn't read the dormant sections of the charter since her onboarding briefing. Clause 9.4 didn't activate when shares were purchased. It activated when the registry changed. That distinction mattered. POV General Counsel Martin Hale. Martin stared at his compliance dashboard as a notification pulsed amber. Proxy consolidation threshold exceeded. He frowned. That threshold hadn't been triggered in years. He opened the bylaws, scrolling past sections most executives never revisited. Clause 9.4. Automatic disclosure upon governance modification. If majority proxy consolidation exists. He checked the consolidation report. 75%. He inhaled slowly. Who authorized the registry amendment? He asked his associate. POV CFO Anika Rao. Anika's screen flickered with a secondary alert. Governance authority, reclassification, would temporarily suspend major grant disbursements pending confirmation. External partners would request verification. A registry shift wasn't cosmetic. It was structural. Back in the lobby, security pretended not to stare. My badge reader blinked red, then amber, then green. I slid the leather folder slightly higher under my arm, not for effect, but out of habit. Evelyn thought she was initiating alignment. In reality, she had triggered recognition. The boardroom doors upstairs were about to close for a summit meant to exclude me. They didn't yet understand something fundamental. When you alter a system without mapping its foundations, the system responds. If your opponent pulls a lever without knowing what it's attached to, who really controls the machinery? The boardroom doors were already closed when I entered. No one announced me. Evelyn Dress stood at the head of the table, tablet open, agenda displayed across the wall screen. Before we begin, she said evenly, legal has prepared amendments to modernize proxy eligibility and streamline governance alignment. No one objected. The language was neutral. Technical, administrative, Martin Hale, general counsel, adjusted his glasses. There's a procedural issue, he said. Evelyn didn't sit. We're already behind schedule. The registry modification filed at 9:11 a.m. triggered clause 9.4. The room quieted not dramatically, just attentively. Evelyn's tone stayed measured. Clarify. Martin looked down at his screen. Clause 9.4 requires automatic disclosure if consolidated proxy holdings exceed majority threshold at the moment governance registry is altered. And the threshold has been exceeded. I walked the remaining length of the table and placed my tablet down. Screen dark. Evelyn's eyes moved to me, then back to Martin. Exceeded by how much? 75%, and there were no gasps, just posture shifts. I tapped once. The screen illuminated. Proxy consolidation verified. Class A, voting authorities, A. Confirmed. Effective timestamp 9:11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Martin continued. Voice steady now. The Secretary of State filing processed automatically upon registry modification. Controlling authority recognition is complete. Irreversible. Evelyn exhaled slowly. You consolidated dormant proxies. I consolidated lawful voting rights. I replied, you weren't listed as an active stakeholder. I wasn't required to be. The proposed amendment to reclassify inactive proxy holders could not proceed without my authorization. Any vote taken in this room without recognized controlling authority present would be void. Martin closed Evelyn's amendment folder gently. Until authority alignment is acknowledged, he said, no governance changes can be ratified. Evelyn looked around the table. 5 minutes earlier, she had been about to formalize exclusions. Now the registry itself had formalized recognition. She had modified the system to accelerate control. The system responded by identifying who already held it. Have you ever seen a structure enforce itself without raising its voice? The room did not erupt. It recalculated. POVCFO Anika Rao. Anika's tablet filled with cascading notifications. Grant disbursement logic was tied to recognized controlling authority. Now that authority had shifted, any pending transfers over the past quarter required confirmation. 3 NIH reallocations flagged amber. 2 defense licensing signatures scheduled for that afternoon stalled automatically. If authority alignment wasn't verified, insurance carriers would request fiduciary clarification. She looked up slowly. This affects external reporting, she said. Voice controlled. We can't proceed with any major transfers until compliance signs off. The word can't hung in the air. POV, Martin Hale, General Counsel. Martin reopened the amendment draft Evelyn had prepared. Without controlling authority consent, the proposal to reclassify proxy holders was void on arrival. Worse, attempting to execute it could expose directors to breach of duty claims. He removed his glasses briefly, then put them back on. We need to suspend the restructuring vote, he said. Not loudly, just definitively. Evelyn's jaw tightened. We're not suspending strategy. This isn't strategy, Martin replied. It's structural authority. POV Alara. I remained seated, hands folded loosely over the leather folder. I didn't take the head chair. Power declared too quickly looks defensive. I'm requesting full disclosure of grant reallocations executed during the restructuring window, I said calmly, before any further agenda items. Several directors avoided eye contact. Outside the glass walls, assistants moved faster than usual. Slack channels buzzed. Whispers traveled quicker than formal memos ever could. The Institute wasn't collapsing, but momentum had stalled. And stalled systems reveal weak joints. When structure shifts in a room full of executives, who panics? First, the person losing authority, or the people realizing it already has. The collapse did not arrive with shouting. It arrived with procedure. Layer 1, operational POV CFO Anika. Rao Anika projected the funding dashboard onto the central screen. Pending authority confirmation, automated disbursements over $2 million are temporarily paused, she said evenly. A murmur moved around the table. Paused. One director asked. Standard protocol, she replied, when controlling authority changes. External partners require verification. 2 research divisions waiting on grant releases would be notified within the hour. Defense licensing signatures scheduled for the afternoon required reauthorization. The institute wasn't imploding. It was frozen. Momentum. Halted by compliance in Layer 2, financial/legal, POV Martin Hale. Martin slid a secondary report forward. There are 3 NIH reallocations executed under restructuring authority. He said, those transfers now require ratification from recognized controlling authority. Evelyn's posture remained composed, but her hands stilled. They were internally approved, she said. Internal approval is insufficient. Martin responded, fiduciary duty requires alignment with recognized voting control. Insurance carriers had already received automated governance change notifications. That alone could trigger independent review. No accusations, no federal agents. Just contracts responding to structure. And contracts, remember. Layer 3, reputation, POV Alara. I stood slowly, not to claim the head chair, but to address the table. 75% of consolidated voting power does not eliminate this board. I said, it obligates it. Eyes shifted. Directors recalculated alliances in real time. One cleared his throat. We need stabilization. Another nodded. Immediate suspension of restructuring until audit review. The motion was called. Evelyn did not oppose it aloud. The vote passed. Unanimous. Chair authority transferred temporarily to compliance oversight pending audit resolution. Not a dramatic removal, a procedural displacement. The summit agenda dissolved. The restructuring initiative, her 90-day mandate, ceased to exist in its current form. Outside the room, whispers sharpened. Inside, posture changed. I didn't smile. I signed the temporary stabilization order and slid it across the table for Martin's countersignature. Operational freeze would lift gradually once authority verification concluded, but the narrative had shifted. The boardroom no longer belonged to ambition. It belonged to documentation. At what point does confidence become negligence, and who pays for the delay when structure intervenes? The official memo went out at 4:37 p.m. No dramatic language, no insinuations, pending fiduciary review. CEO Evelyn. Dress is placed on administrative leave. Governance restructuring initiatives are suspended effective immediately, and that was all. POV Martin Hale. General Counsel Martin drafted the language carefully. Administrative leave was not admission. It was insulation for the institution and for the board. Precision protects everyone, he said quietly when a director suggested stronger wording. 5 directors submitted voluntary resignations before sunset, not under threat, under gravity. 7 seats were reassigned through interim vote, aligning with consolidated authority thresholds. Compliance oversight temporarily chaired proceedings. No applause followed, just signatures. POV Alara. I remained at the far end of the table as the final documents were signed. I still had not taken the head chair. This isn't retaliation, I said, meeting each director's eyes. It's enforcement of fiduciary structure. The distinction mattered. Outside the boardroom, department heads waited for guidance. Slack channels slowed. Systems recalibrated. Grant disbursements resumed gradually once authority alignment cleared compliance verification. Operational stability returned within 48 hours. Reputation did not. Whispers circulated across faculty corridors. Some saw reform. Others saw consolidation. Power is rarely interpreted uniformly. That evening, as I walked through the lobby that had denied me entry that morning, no one stopped me, but no one congratulated me either. Institutions respond to structure. People respond to perception. Does accountability feel different when it arrives without spectacle? The first article appeared 72 hours later. Hostile consolidation raises governance questions at Lurin Institute. The wording was careful, no accusations, no legal claims, just doubt. Anonymous sources described a strategic proxy sweep executed through offshore holding entities. The phrase wasn't illegal. It was destabilizing. POV Communications Director Lena Torres. Lena set her phone down on the conference table. Defense partners are asking whether this was coordinated to bypass board transparency. One foundation delayed a scheduled grant announcement pending clarification of governance continuity. Momentum had returned to the Institute. Now narrative risk threatened to stall it again. POV CFO Anika Rao. Anika reviewed the funding calendar. If two partners freeze commitments, liquidity tightens for Q4, she said calmly. Not catastrophic, but constraining. The Institute had survived structural collapse. It might still suffer reputational drag. POV Alara. I didn't respond to the headline. I assembled documentation. Full proxy acquisition chain, transfer certifications, trust disclosures, Secretary of State confirmation, independent audit summary, every document cross-referenced, publicly accessible, downloadable, no commentary, no opinion, just structure. We released the archive through a neutral governance transparency portal, time-stamped and indexed. Martin coordinated a formal statement from the Independent Ethics Oversight Council confirming compliance with institutional bylaws. Within 48 hours, and the follow-up article ran consolidation. Found consistent with existing charter. The language softened, the freeze from the foundation lifted. Defense partners resumed scheduled calls. Late that evening, Martin forwarded a letter from Evelyn's legal team. Proposal joint public statement, framing the transition as a mutual strategic evolution. Limited liability language, quiet settlement, no further narrative escalation. Containment. I read the letter once, then drafted a reply. No joint reframing. Documentation stands on its own. Silence is not weakness. Silence, when supported by records, is position. When your authority is questioned publicly, do you argue louder or publish the ledger? Stability returned quietly. Grant flows normalized. Licensing negotiations resumed under revised oversight. Insurance carriers closed their fiduciary reviews without penalty. The audit concluded with restitution adjustments and formal governance corrections. Nothing criminal. Everything contractual. The Institute survived, but something else shifted. Pio Villara, 3 colleagues. I once collaborated with stopped responding to invitations. One sent a brief message. I preferred you when you were advising, not deciding. Authority clarifies hierarchy. It complicates comfort. I had not gained power in the theatrical sense. I had gained finality. The board ratified the compliance framework unanimously. 7 new directors assumed seats. Governance documentation was amended to prevent future ambiguity and proxy recognition. Late afternoon, Martin stepped into my office. They've withdrawn the immunity proposal, he said. No further negotiation. I nodded. I opened my laptop and drafted one final internal memorandum. Effective immediately. All governance amendments will require dual structural review before registry modification. No exceptions. Send. That was the punctuation. Not a confrontation, a safeguard. An hour later, the public registry refreshed across the compliance display, controlling authority. Dr. Alara Mesor. Text time-stamped. I walked into the boardroom after sunset. The head chair remained empty. I did not sit in it. Instead, I placed the leather folder, the one that carried 18 months of signatures, filings, and quiet consolidation into the governance archive cabinet. Then I removed the temporary visitor badge I had worn that morning when security questioned my presence. I placed it inside the folder before closing the drawer. That was the trophy. Not the title. The correction. Institutions rarely fall because someone challenges them. They destabilize when leadership moves faster than the structure designed to contain it. Diligence does not shout. It records, it waits, and when necessary, it enforces. What boundary in your life requires documentation instead of emotion? Thank you for listening. If this story made you stop and think, hit like to support, subscribe for more stories like this, and leave a comment with your perspective. We read every one.